Welcome into the M&M Discipleship Podcast, where we discuss what it means to be a disciple of Christ. We aim to look for God in our daily lives, be in His Word, and strive to live out the teachings of Jesus Christ. This is Michael Round, and this is my co-host, Dakota Moody. Hey, man, how you doing?
I am doing excellent this morning. How about you, good sir?
Doing really well. Finally thawed out. We don't really have any snow anymore, and we're expecting a lot of rain. So it's nice to have a normal weather pattern.
Mm.
How about
See,
you?
you ask, what is that called? Is it where you ask and you get more than what you ask for in that way? I forget what that's. There's like a term for that. Um, anyway, but you ask for some winter weather, and you were given more than you really much cared for at that point, right? So,
Yeah, pretty well. We were, school was out for a weekend Monday.
oh my
No, a weekend
goodness.
Tuesday. Today is their
Yeah.
first day back.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so 7 days out of school.
Man, but we would have killed for that back in the day.
Oh yeah.
What's funny, as I've gotten older now, I've seen parents share on social media the struggle that it is for them. Because now, not that I'm a parent anyway, but I know a lot of people who are of that parental age and people who are in their kind of 30s and who are having to deal with whenever the school is closed and their kid has to stay home for that day, what effect that has. Whenever I was a kid, that's the last thing I was thinking of. I was thinking about how awesome it was for me to not
Yeah.
have to go to school. I didn't think about how much stress that put my parents under, like, where are we going to put this kid while we go to work or something like that. And now, as seeing this from a little bit older perspective, I go, wow, man, I can't believe how much strain that puts a parent under.
Yeah, until you get cabin fever, you're like
Mm.
it's good for the whole family to get out and do stuff and get in our normal routine, and that tires the kids out. But yeah, no,
Yeah,
it's difficult. And I feel
yeah.
for the ones that really had to work and had to struggle to make arrangements, and
Mhm.
so yeah, no, it's not easy, and that's for sure.
No, no, it can really affect a lot of things in that way. So I can feel very blessed that we did not have much of any issues really here with anything. In fact, today has been quite a warm day. I mean, last night it didn't dip below 45, which was quite
Mm.
something, like the whole night, which is very strange because normally I come out in the morning and it's in the 20s, but even now it's feeling quite nice. So it's almost spring-like. But I'm sure we'll still have one more freeze in us before it's all over, or two, maybe even. But I'm glad things are looking up both for you weather-wise and for us here. Now, speaking of weather, speaking of the outside, God's creation, where have you seen God, I should say, in your life this week?
Where I've seen him is, um, I just have to say, like, I would say that all the unspoken prayers and the people that are going through difficult things
Mm,
and how God answers those, and
mm,
people dealing with illness, with sickness, just partly that time of year, but a lot of people are dealing with illness and difficulty, and the way that God answers those prayers and how He makes those things work together for good. So that's where I've seen it, and we've been studying that for a long time in one of our Bible classes, and so it's something that I've been looking out for. But just how God answers prayer, and I was with one particular individual yesterday, and he is doing so well. Had a serious surgery, and he's been recovering very well, and
mm,
been able to be more active. And so I see God and how He has cared for His people and answered prayer. What about you?
mm. So great to hear. So it's always a great reminder that God is in control whenever those prayers get answered and that He is listening to us, understanding our situations. Because sometimes we can forget that whenever we feel like He is maybe not listening, sometimes whenever our prayers aren't answered. But in fact, He always is. And He does things on His own time in His own way. And it's always for our benefit in that way. So I'm
Absolutely.
glad that's been a blessing to you. Um, general observation. I went up to my parents this last weekend, and yeah, being where they're at in West North Carolina, they still didn't get too bad of a weather situation just in general. I mean, it was cold at one point. I mean, one point it was single digits and stuff like that. But they didn't have that with like ice or snow really. But when you look up at the higher elevation where they're at, obviously they're kind of nestled in the mountains. And so even though my parents are about 2,000 feet above sea level, you look up at mountains that are three or more thousand feet above sea level. And the difference in climate's obviously much different as you look from you to up there. And there's a lot of beautiful things in God's creation. There's a lot of things that just look quite nice and we can be blessed with. I don't know if there's too much more though than too much more of a beautiful thing than snow on mountains.
Yeah,
You know what I
I'm with you
mean?
on that.
Like snow on mountains, probably the most beautiful sight to see, especially with like trees and everything. It's a beautiful sight. And that was one of those things where, I've seen some snow, seen some things like that, but it's been nice to be closer to home so I could get to the mountains more easily. But to see the snow on the mountains, it's just a whole different thing. And you're talking about the beauty of God's creation. It it's not too much more beauty you can see than in that.
Yeah, yeah, and that's one reason why I like the Rockies so much. It's
Mm,
because most of the year, what is, I don't know, and forgive me if this is an ignorant answer, but from what I remember, it's 8 or 9 months of the year they have snow on them, if
yeah,
not more.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so I'm like, we went in 2019 in June, and they were
Hmm.
still skiing.
Hmm.
Uh, so like
Yeah,
that was the last week of ski season. They were because they had so much snow from that winter.
yeah.
But yeah, I'm with you because the mountains. I said it in a lesson recently. I feel like when they have snow on them, they just look as they should be.
Hmm.
Uh, it just brings out what mountains should look
It
like.
looks like that
Uh,
Bob Ross painting at that point.
yeah. Oh, exactly. 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 Of course, I know not so much where you were, but like, well, I guess too, maybe if you have some pines and things, but out west, they have the evergreens. Most of the trees are evergreens.
Yeah,
So you have the green color with the snow and the
yeah,
the Rocky Mountains. So, but yeah,
yeah.
that's certainly a beautiful thing.
I do know what you mean by that because it's whenever you see snow on mountains, especially at a time when you don't expect it. Because whenever I was a little younger, I was still in high school. I've told you before this, Michael, but I went to Italy during summertime, and you're thinking like Italy summertime, very warm. It was northern Italy though, so very temperate climate, very nice. But you look at the top of the Alps there in northern Italy, and there's snow. There's icy snow on top of these mountains in Italy in like July. And you
Hmm.
go, how?
Yeah.
But I will say the most beautiful place I've ever been to in my entire life was there because you
Yeah.
could see that on top of those mountains at such a time where it was nice and comfortable outside as well. It was fantastic. And I haven't been to the Rockies myself, but I've been to the Alps and it's very similar.
Yeah, I mean they're similar. Yeah, they're very similar
Yeah,
mountain
very
ranges. And
similar.
something interesting I've seen recently is just the latitude of not Germany, you're German. The latitude of Europe.
Yeah.
Um, how much of it is on the same latitude as like Canada and the northern United States. So much of Europe gets more snow, more cold weather than we do here, and we just think it's equal. But then
Yeah.
like so we follow European soccer, and it's always fun to hear about the players and the journalists coming over and spending time in the summer in like Florida and how
Yeah.
hot it is to them and how much
Yeah.
they enjoy Florida weather. And we're
Hmm.
like, yeah, we take stuff like that for granted in the United States.
Well, we really do because if you look at like I've seen some of those maps recently as well, and like Florida is on the same latitude as like Egypt.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and Texas is like Libya or something like that. Whereas, if even a place that would be like would be more along our lines would be like North Carolina to like central Italy or something like that. It's it
Yeah.
you, and that's like one of the places where you think, oh man, it's really hot over there during this time of year. It's like no, no, I mean it can get hot there in central Italy, but man, we have no idea kind of how that works out sometimes. And I know this personally from having family over in Germany, especially southern Germany. It's kind of interesting the way that the weather patterns work and how we think of it as compared to how it is there at most times.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my dad just got back from Costa Rica, and Costa Rica in January,
Mm.
it's still very moderate. It was actually hot. It
Oh,
was,
I'm sure.
and he figured out that there was nearly 100-degree difference in what he was experiencing in Costa Rica in the 90s, 90 degrees,
Yeah.
and what we were experiencing in Tennessee when it was negative 13, that day, 100-degree difference.
Yeah. I've seen some pretty stark temperature differences. That's kind of an extreme one though. Yeah.
Well, and like it's not that far away either.
No.
They traveled from Atlanta,
Yeah.
and it was like a 4-hour flight from Atlanta.
Yeah.
And so I mean that's not terribly far.
But when you fly straight towards the equator, it does make it.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
It gets a little bit hotter.
just a little bit, just a little bit.
So
Well, continuing
big
in our
things.
study, yes, exactly. Some very nice things in creation that we can see. So we want to go ahead and continue on with our study on the Sermon on the Mount, and we're getting close to about the halfway point, Sermon on the Mount, if we've not already close to cross that. This week we want to talk about Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21, and Jesus discussing where our treasures should be stored. So, Michael, if you want to go ahead and read that, Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21.
Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So what observations do you have as you read that, Dakota?
Biggest thing is I think it needs to be read in context. This is a passage that can absolutely be taken out of context and can still be used for some good application, I feel like. However, we need to take this in context. So we had just talked about um, Jesus has just talked about how we shouldn't be doing certain spiritual disciplines, good spiritual things like giving to those who are in need, fasting and prayer. We shouldn't be doing these things outwardly for other people to see us. Well, now we get to this section and we can just focus on material, right? And this is where we think of, and this is a lot of times where this passage gets used. It's all about the material, right? Don't store up your treasures where moth and rust destroy. But if you think about this in context, and I think we can certainly talk about the material, but we think about this in context. What does this mean? Well, don't practice your righteousness before others in order to receive your glory and your righteousness and your respect here. Do things so that way you are pleasing your Father in heaven, doing things so that you are being a glory to the kingdom, not a glory to yourself. Don't be doing things to receive rewards here, but instead do things to receive eternal rewards in heaven. And I think,
Mm.
given the context, that's the main thing I think we should get from this. Yes. Does this also mean that we should not try to garner up for ourselves a tremendous amount of earthly riches and have that be our life's main pursuit, um, instead of pursuing the things of God, right? We should not be doing that. We should not be trying to put everything here on earth. However, I want to make sure the context of the passage is respected in the fact that we must also look at this from the standpoint of practicing our righteousness before others in order to be seen by them, not doing that so that way we are glorified here, but that instead our Father is glorified so that way we will receive those rewards in heaven.
Well, and this is a part of the paradigm shift, going from the old Jewish law to the kingdom that Christ is establishing. Is it moves from the physical to the spiritual.
Right.
And I think probably a big reason why people emphasize in this the physical things is because he uses a physical example. But he also does talk specifically later, which we will get into in the next couple of weeks, about physical things, what we're going to eat, what we're going to drink, what we're going to wear.
Yeah.
And so, it's definitely, like you said, it's definitely applicable. But, don't just focus on the praise of men here, focus on the
Mhm.
praise of God in heaven. So that's a big shift, a paradigm shift that Jesus is introducing with his whole ministry.
Yeah.
And in this sermon, he is making that shift as well. He's going to talk about those physical things toward the end of chapter 6. But it's just a very good observation and a very good point. And two, he says that there at the end, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. What do you make of that last sentence there?
Well, again, I think we've mentioned this on multiple occasions, and we're going to until we finish the Sermon on the Mount. It's all about the heart. Jesus is trying to reach the heart of the listeners, the heart of those who are there, the heart of his followers that way. And more than anything, this is a heart focused lesson in this section. He says it directly. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. If your focus and your treasure is on the praise of men, that is where your heart will be. That is where your main concern will be. If your first and primary concern is that treasure is stored for you in heaven, you are focusing on the work of God, then that is where your heart will be. And it can apply with material things. And as you do mention, he's going to start transitioning in that way towards the physical. I think this is a passage that can do both of those things. One of those things that Jesus says that could mean multiple things by saying one thing. But I think that's the focus for this is saying, where is your heart?
Yeah. Well, and how fickle too, we talk, he talks about the fickleness of wealth and riches and how moth and rust destroy and thieves break in and steal. Well, the praise of other people is the exact same way. I mean,
Yeah.
this is, we talk about sports a decent bit, but like, in the NFL, they talk about how it's a week to week league. What have you done for me lately? And
Yep.
that's the way the praise of people is, if things are going well and you're looking good, you're performing, in whatever arena you're talking about, people will like you and appreciate you. But the moment you struggle or the moment you do something they don't agree with, people can turn their back on you in a hurry. So, the praise and admiration of others is also very fickle and very uncertain. And so that's why we should be seeking the approval of God that is sure and steadfast and obviously eternal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's transition to our reading segment and talk about what we're reading this week. Michael, what are you reading this week?
So I don't know if it's you or if it's just where I'm at. But I think I can say I've transitioned to being a two book person.
Mm,
Um,
it's a
so I
problem.
have, yeah, I have more of a spiritual book, um,
Mhm.
something that's along those lines, or maybe even just productive, something positive, and then maybe something a little bit less so. And so I started a book yesterday by John Meacham called American Gospel.
Mm,
I enjoy history and have for a long time. And so talking with people that know history and have studied it, they really enjoy and respect John Meacham's work. And so I was able to get a hold of this book. Somebody was giving away books. And so I got this book and thought it would be a good place to start. And it's about how when our country was founded, how influenced it was by Christian principles and
mm,
how Christianity and religious freedom has been at the heart of our country from the very beginning. And I wanted to share a quote from James Madison, where he said, whilst we assert for ourselves a freedom to embrace, to profess, and observe the religion which we believe to be of divine origin, we cannot deny an equal freedom to those whose minds have not yet yielded to the evidence which has convinced us.
mm,
So I really respect and appreciate that methodology and that stance. We have been convinced, but we respect the freedom of those people who have not yet been convinced. And of
mm.
course, when you're thinking about your disciple making books that you've been reading, there's that undertone of evangelism and disciple making. Well, they are people that haven't yet been convinced.
Absolutely.
But anyways, the book, as I'm beginning to see, I'm 20 pages in or so, just about the religious beliefs of many of our founding fathers, and it seems like that quote by James Madison just kind of summarizes a lot of their thoughts that we believe in certain things, but yet we want to provide a country and allow for others to have different beliefs.
Yep.
So what about you, man? What have you been reading?
I think it's something very important for us to remember in that way is that those who have founded our country were absolutely of faith, but they also
Yes.
allowed for a country of religious freedom
Yes.
to do as they will.
Well,
we
and the
need
other
to remember
thing,
that.
one thing on that,
Yeah.
they were very different. It wasn't that they
Mm,
were all Methodist or all Baptist or all, of a sort of Episcopal or deist or Catholic or whatever. They were all over the map.
Yeah.
And that's one thing he's already bringing out in his book.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're again allowing for religious freedom.
And in fact, some of their beliefs on Christianity would probably make many of our skin crawl if we actually
Well,
a little
that's
bit
it.
about it, right?
That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Talk about the
And he even
Thomas
talked.
Jefferson Bible and cutting out, all the miracles and things like
Yes.
that because it was too miraculous for him. All those sorts of things. Like, yeah, need to remember that as when we're talking about our forefathers. It's very interesting. But I think that's a very interesting observation you made, and I would like to hear more about that as you continue on. So hopefully you'll be able to share more with us as time goes along. I finished The Lost Art of Disciple Making, and I have moved on to a new discipleship book, of course, because that is my main focus in life right now, is The Master Plan of Discipleship. And in the first chapter, it seems he's really emphasizing kind of the gospel and the gospel message and what that vision looks like. But in so doing, he talks about the the way that the disciples of Christ did not fully understand. They didn't have the full vision for what Christ's actual ministry was, even up until the point of his ascension. Right? He still didn't understand, and they're still talking about even right before Christ ascends. They're asking him, "Will you now restore the kingdom to Israel?" Right? They're still asking this question towards the end, even at this point, and they still just are not fully understanding it. And the author here, Robert Coleman, it discusses why that could potentially be so, and why this is still an issue for us today. Because he's talking about this from the extent of we want things to be solved so much in our modern world, and we're so used to the devices of this world kind of fixing our problems, quote unquote, in different ways, that we count on it so much that it almost hurts our assurance about God and his ultimate victory in the world. And he talks about it like this. This is the quote he says: "Is there not still an inclination among persons of goodwill to think in terms of material comfort and success? Our values tend to be determined more by fleshly gratification than the New Jerusalem. Concerning change in society," this is the interesting one, "we are so accustomed to human manipulation, if not legislative coercion, that the quiet exercise of spiritual power seems unreal. Even where
Hmm.
there is reliance on this unseen strength of God, too often it issues more from the fanciful imagination than true faith in Christ." And I think there's an interesting connection between some of what you have shared from Meacham's book and this, in the fact that there are people who are very concerned, very saddened about the moral state of this country and the West as a whole, right? And I share in some of those concerns and anxieties, right? I do, because there is a moral decay that we see happening in a lot of ways. Now, I'll argue some of that was always there, because we still had things like slavery, and we still had things even after that ended, like Jim Crow laws and things like that. There's still been a lot of really negative ways in which people have acted in throughout the history of this country and the West in general. But there is a moral decay that is happening. There's no doubt about that. Parenting is not improving. There's certain social aspects that are not going in a positive and right direction. However, what I will say is this: what he makes mention there is that we see this happening and we feel helpless to it. And so our reaction then is to um, then throw our hopes to things like, for example, political candidates who
Hmm.
say that they are wanting to legislate certain moralities that the government should in no way be legislating. However, we want these things to change so much, and this is the only way we feel it can happen. When instead, the call should be for renewal and change within Christendom that can help to influence this change throughout the world, rather than looking to our government, rather
Hmm.
looking to physical institutions for that. It is the responsibility of each and every Christian in every walk of life in which they live to stimulate this spiritual revival in this way. And that is how change gets made. We should not be, as Christians, we should not be entrusting this to worldly powers to do, but
Yeah.
instead be focusing on what we can do in the lives of each and every Christian. Because if every Christian looked as to how they can help bring up the morality in the world around them, it would make a million times better and more impact than anything a government could do that is tremendous overreach.
That's a really good point. And it's funny that this gets brought up because I was listening to a podcast yesterday. John Mark Comer was interviewed by Carey Nieuwhof, and he was talking about how discipleship and the progress and maturity of disciples happens in different stages. And he uses the book, The Critical Journey, to describe this. And I don't have a lot of the details associated with this, but he talks about how people progress past that initial conversion and they progress past the initial learning and growing stage, and they go into the working stage and they get burnout, or a something of life hits them in the face, and he describes it as a wall. They hit this wall, someone dies or they lose their job or whatever, and a lot of times people will give up on their faith and they will then transition towards some other cause that gives them a sense of greater meaning. And it might be LGBTQ plus rights. It might be political activism. It might be, I don't know, maybe pedo or something like that. But anyways, it's like a shift that takes place. And things like that, like you're describing, are that next thing over, that next lane they get into. And so obviously, we look to Christ, we look to God for change. And there's also, I think, stems from kind of our sense of we focus so much on things that are outside of our control. And instead, like you're describing, if we just made our little corner of the world a better place, and we tried to make a difference in the lives of the people that we can actually influence, then so much more change would take place.
Absolutely.
And it's that whole, well, other people need to do this or other people should do that. And, that's going to change people. No, it's all of us, you making a difference where you are, me making a difference where I am, and every person listening to this making a difference where they are. That would make much more positive impact than, political structures.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't look to other people, especially morally questionable people, to try to save morals in this country, right? Can't be doing that. We have
Yeah.
to be able to try to count on we have to feel assured that God can create that kind of revolution if it is within his will, and if his people are motivated to do it, right?
Yep.
And so what we have to do is person by person, situation by situation, start that change in our own lives, in our own communities, and that's how things change. And that's how that renewal can begin, that revitalization of God's people, and revival can truly catch fire in Christ's church. So let that be our goal this week as we exit. Let's make that impact in our own lives, however best we can. So, Michael, anything else before we close out here today?
Just one last thing, disciples making disciples. And that's
Amen.
the church that Christ established, that God foreordained. And so that's what we should be striving to be.
Absolutely. And if you know any disciples of Christ out there who are looking for some good Christian content, good podcasts to listen to fill some of that time and hopefully can spark some more revival and revolution in that way in the lives of Christians, send them our way and tell them about the M&M Discipleship Podcast.
And on that, before you go, if you ever have any questions about books we're reading or things we've got going on, feel free to message us. You can find us on Facebook. You can email us, whatever. However you're interacting with us, reach out, and we'd love to hear from you guys.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So hopefully we'll hear from you all soon. And until next time, we want to thank you for joining us today on the M&M Discipleship Podcast. Until next time, let's look for God, learn from his word, and live out his teachings. Bye for now.